Welcome to the SSI Orbit podcast, a forum where we explore the ever-growing ecosystems of self-sovereign identity. And I'm your host, Mathieu Glaude. In today's episode, I'm joined by Paul Knowles, an individual who defines himself as a semantic nerd. So Paul does all sorts of work in the decentralized identity space, but notably, he's the head of the advisory council at the Human Colossus Foundation. He's the convener of the Trust Over IP's Input and Semantics Working Group. He also acts as head of communications at the Sovereign Foundation. So Paul is the innovation lead behind the Master Mouse model, a conceptual model for a dynamic data economy, which is a safe and secure data sharing economy. He's also the inventor of the Overlays Capture Architecture, OCA, and the main spearhead behind the Blinding Identity Taxonomy, both of which facilitate a unified data language so that harmonized data can be utilized for improved data science, statistics, analytics, and other meaningful services. So without further ado, here's the conversation with Paul Knowles. Enjoy. And we're on. Paul, how's it going?
Hey, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the podcast.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this too. Many different people have spoken to me about some of the work that you and the Human Colossus Foundation are doing within the foundation, but with different community initiatives as well over the past little while. So have been quite interested in the work you're doing and looking forward to just going a little deeper into this with you today. So thanks for doing this.
No, sure. No, pleasure.
So when I started kind of looking into your background of how you got to what you're doing now, it seems like you had early, I don't know if it's early on in your career, if it's a passion or stuff you still do now, but there's a lot of interest and activity in the music industry.
Yes. So yeah, I've always had a bit of a dual career in music and the pharmaceutical industry. So like a lot of people in the music industry, you kind of need a second job sometimes to keep your passion going. So my crux was the pharmaceutical industry. But yes, in the music industry, well, take it back a step. My degree at university was in IT. And right after university, I did an audio engineering degree in London and learned how to work with the big mixing desks in recording studios. And from there, I started working for a couple of recording studios, getting to understand the trade as an audio engineer. And I kind of fell into private events through my music industry career. And I ended up doing showcases for international artists traveling into the UK at the Gibson showroom. So, Gibson guitars, they have had some showrooms in London. So whenever anyone decent was coming through, I'd put on a showcase for the UK music industry. And that would usually kind of kick off their UK tour. So through that, I ended up one of the artists that came through was an Indian artist called Raghu Dixit, who was actually the highest selling independent artist in India outside of Bollywood. And I put on one of these showcases for him, and basically ended up co-managing him for a while. That kind of kept me busy, and I got to fly around the world a little bit with him. But I guess it was that journey that kind of started getting me into the data space at the same time. So I created a platform called the International Music Community. And the idea of the platform was really to introduce up-and-coming artists to music industry professionals, but using data to build those algorithms. So for instance, an artist would get all their social media traffic and then kind of put that into an algorithm and then hook them up with industry professionals that had worked with artists of a similar kind of level. And it was an interesting space. We ended up white labeling that platform. And a lot of the music industry conferences really liked it because, as you can imagine, in the panels, you've got, the president of Warner Brothers or something on the panel, and they don't want to be bombarded with contacts from baby artists. So through this kind of tiering thing that we'd built within the platform, I was able to protect the identity of the music professionals at the high end, but at the same time, they could look down into the filter to find the kind of up and coming artists that they were looking for. So yeah, that got me kind of into the data space in music. And at the same time, I'd always had this parallel career in the pharmaceutical industry, in data management and also statistical analysis. So that was kind of paying the bills as I was doing all of the music stuff. And that's really kind of how I became so interested in semantics, I suppose. That's kind of how it all started. My journey into SSI was really through that algorithm thing within the music platform, because I wanted a way of authenticating when an industry professional said that they worked with Rod Stewart or something like that. I wanted some way of authenticating that information. And that's really when I kind of got into SSI and decentralized authentication and key management and stuff. So yeah,
that's super interesting. Yeah, as you were explaining your marketplace space, I don't know if marketplace solution, but connecting the up and coming artists or musicians with labels and so forth, I was just right away, just my head's going to credentials and showing proofs and just doing matchmaking, which I guess the way the platform had been built before kind of self-sovereign identity, you could see a next evolution of this or growing into its own ecosystem solution potentially, right? Using verifiable credentials.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the platform was an incredibly federated platform when I built it, because I just didn't know that SSI existed. So as soon as I found that ecosystem, then I kind of tore up the rule book and said, this isn't going to work. I have to rebuild it.
Yeah, but I guess you're at the same time you're definitely solving significant problems with the way it was built, and I'm sure it still does, right? It's just now looking at now this type of thing is possible. We could explore all these new kind of business opportunities with this. That's what at least gets me excited every day when I get up and look at the self-sovereign identity stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then so working in pharma, it seems like big data is just crucial to pharma, like big data and just your identity management at the core too. But is that what really got you thinking a little more about the data structures and how to really kind of it's all about in pharma, I need to have very solid data inputs, but if I want to be able to share results and share it across multiple parties, and I think it was in clinical testing as well, right? That really got you thinking about the structure of data a lot more?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the first jobs I had in the pharmaceutical industry was actually data entry for the, they had the clinical report forms, which are all handwritten, and I'd have to kind of enter that into the system. And, in those days, it was really dodgy. You'd have all sorts of doctor's notes and comments, and you're entering all of that, which is obviously full of PII information and dangerous data. So, it wasn't nearly as strict as it is now. But yes, it kind of did get me thinking about semantics very early. Obviously for all those free-form text fields and stuff, bringing in predefined entries and, putting some structure around data so that it becomes useful for machine reading and analytics and all that sort of stuff. And really, one of the pain points with clinical data capture is, when you work on two sister trials, trying to aggregate that data together at the end of the process, it was always little things that would break that pooling process. Things like maybe the same attribute had different formatting in each study, or the length of the attribute was different in each study, so that when you aggregated it, the data would truncate. And these are pain points that are still going on today in the pharmaceutical industry. So that's really kind of where I started really delving hard into semantics and trying to find new ways of capturing data, different architectures, all that sort of stuff to try and get some of those pain points ironed out.
Got it. Yeah, I a long time ago, I spent some time working in a clinic, and we conducted clinical trials. It was later stage trials on patients that would come in for the trials, and I did all sorts of different stuff in this clinic. But I was more, I guess, on the input side. Like I was managing the operation and the intake of the drug that was being administered, and the blood sampling and the testing and stuff like that. But it was kind of more on the input side of things. It wasn't on kind of the data and the analysis side of things. And so that seems, that's really how you're looking at kind of the inputs and semantics. It's the two sides, right, of this. How do you describe inputs and semantics to someone?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, the easiest way to think about it is, inputs, what is being inputted into a digital system or ecosystem, and semantics, what is providing context and meaning to the information that's being entered into a system. Those are kind of the two main differences. Another way to look at it would be data entry versus data capture. So, when you just say pure data entry, that's kind of your, the keys that you enter on your keyboard into a system. But really, to bring any context or meaning, it relies on data capture. So when you enter something and you need to capture it into a schema structure or something like that. So, that's where you have all your formatting and your machine, your predefined entries, your human readable labels. The context, the metadata of the schema, all that sort of stuff. So all of that rich information that brings contextual meaning to the data that's been inputted. So on one side, the data inputs is on the input side, you want to know that the data has come from an authenticable source. Whereas on the input side, it's more about making sure that the context and the semantics around the data, those constructs are immutable, so that any actor interacting with any of those objects knows that that the data capture structures are the same for everybody.
Got it. And does this go, and you had a nice illustration of kind of semantics and inputs, kind of a diagram you had, and you started splitting everything up into both of them. Does this go all the way down? Like if you're looking at kind of the different inputs through credentials, does that push all the way through to attributes? Does that push all the way through to like deeper objects? And it definitely seems that with, I guess, in the self-sovereign identity space, like entering with that mindset, if these things are needed, you must have realized pretty quickly that, oh crap, like for this to actually take off, like there's a lot of this infrastructure that needs to be in place.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you're talking about a decentralized ecosystem, it kind of, you are looking at a lot of innovation to enable that whole space to work. I mean, one way that I would say to people is that, you've almost got to treat the entire data economy as one company. So, within a company, you would have a data analyst group or something like that, plus maybe something that's more, groups that are more geared towards marketing or whatever. These sorts of differences within an organization, they work quite well. But as soon as you go into a decentralized space, it's where do you categorize things in a totally decentralized space so that you have communication throughout the entire data ecosystem. So, I mean, really, that model that you're talking about, I think the official term for it is the model of identifier states. At the Human Colossus Foundation, because of the shape of it, we call it the rugby ball model.
Yeah, that is what it looks like. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, but really, I built that model really because the decentralized identity folks, they we're overlooking semantics, I think. And, obviously with my data management background, I wanted to get some kind of model for them to understand the importance of semantics. And that, when you talk about decentralized key management solutions, that you're really only looking at half of the puzzle. That puzzle is all about, making sure that data comes from an authentic source, but regarding all the immutable semantics and stuff, that's the other half of the model. I call that the semantics domain. So yeah, that model's that's been fun. I mean, and that took a little while to kind of get down to the nitty gritty of the dualism between every component within each half of that model. So for instance, when you talk about an attribute in a schema on the input side, that's a claim within a credential. So basically the input side is really about real data, and the semantic side is about, the constructs that were used to put context into that data inputs. Yeah.
So I guess you're involved in many different communities. One of them, which we've kind of we've seen each other in different working groups, and you run your own working group in there in the trust over IP. How does this model fit into the trust over IP stack? Because I think there's different types of organizations or people that are playing at different levels in the trust over IP stack. So for example, you could have people just playing at the layer one, they're building public identity utilities. You could have other companies like the company I represent that is playing more at the top. Like we're enabling ecosystem solutions to be built. But just like there is a governance layer across the stack, it seems like what you're bringing here through inputs and semantics needs to be taken into consideration across the stack, I would think. So how does that fit into the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just a different vantage point of it's still a full ecosystem. So with the dual stack at Trust over IP, you're looking at governance versus technology across the 4 layers that you mentioned, right from utility at layer 1 right up to the ecosystems at layer 4. And that gives you a fairly big picture of like a data economy. But only from a governance versus technology perspective. The inputs and semantics group is really just a different vantage point, thinking more about what is entered into a system and the meaning of the data that you're capturing and stuff like that. So it's still a totally full model, but it's complementary to the dual stack. I would suggest that data entry and data capture is valid for all 4 layers. And then at each layer, it's really about how you're capturing that data to make sure that, it's not so much about what you're capturing at the time. It's kind of thinking a little bit beyond that, thinking. So for instance, with all the vaccine stuff, it's great if your apps can work for contact tracing and all that sort of stuff, great. But then the way that I think about data is, okay, so in the pandemic, if you have like the World Health Organization, how can we make this data useful for their processes and their analytics at their end, so that they can get some like real-time analytics to see how the pandemic is responding. So I think there's always a broader context sometimes than some developers sometimes think. Yeah.
And so you approached this through the Human Colossus Foundation. What was kind of your steps to forming this? Like, what was your journey of starting this organization, and why have you structured it the way you've structured it?
Yeah, well, really the foundation, it really started because of Overlay's capture architecture. At the time, so that foundation was founded, it was founded by 3 of us, myself, Robert Mitwicki and Philippe Page. But the idea of it really kicked off when I met Robert. So Robert's a deep stack developer, but he's an interesting developer. He's always got a very broad perspective on the things that he's building. We kind of hit it off immediately when I showed him Overlay's capture architecture. And initially we had built an innovation hub at a proprietary company called Dativa. But then we soon realized that, well, we were building out OCA in that environment, that it had to be open source. And by that time, we'd also started developing a model called the master mouse model, which is a kind of a conceptual model of what a dynamic data economy would look like. And that was really all spearheaded through the characteristics of Overlay's capture architecture. So yes, the foundation, and really the reason we built the foundation was we knew that OCA was going to be an important part, but we knew that what they were doing with the SSI in Hyperledger Aries and Hyperledger Indy, that was an important space for authentic a provenance chain, if you like. So it was really about taking these different parts and trying to have a foundation where we could knit some of these components together without having to disrupt too much of what was going on in those communities. We could kind of do it within our own foundation. Everything we build is totally open source. So, as soon as we've done a proof of concept, or, we've knitted some components together for the benefit of the economy, then we can showcase that, and people can just pick up those components and integrate them into their own solutions. Yeah.
Is it very, so then is the stuff that's being produced by the foundation, like the Overlays capture architecture, which was kind of the starting point, is it all very use case oriented, or is it more just generic frameworks that just need to be customized?
Yeah, no, they're totally generic, everything. Yeah. So, one of the components we're developing at the moment is a trusted digital assistant. So that's kind of a deeper component into the stack than a traditional digital wallet, if you like. You're probably aware of Kerry. I don't know if you've come across Kerry. So
yeah, and it seems like a lot of the, at least in the seminar you threw, you had Sam Smith that was involved in this. Like we're personally quite excited. Well, we're quite excited about Kerry, but we're also quite excited just about the network of networks concept. So those fit in nicely together. It seems like we're quite aligned on that. Yeah.
So Kerry is a very interesting architecture because, with a data ecosystem, you can really go two different ways. You can either have your root of trust being a node on the network. So, whether that's sovereign or Ethereum or Bitcoin or whatever, that kind of provides a root of trust. But what Kerry promises to enable, and I say promises because it's still being developed as we speak, you could change your root of trust because it's a ledgerless solution. So your root of trust could be what we call a trusted digital assistant, which is a component on your mobile phone. And the importance of doing it that way is because you avoid all this potential network lock-in. So when some people are building on Hyperledger Fabric, others on Ethereum and stuff, you could potentially get into these interoperability issues with the way DIDs are currently. Because with the decentralized identifiers, you have this method space, which usually gives you the location of where the identifier is housed. So if it's DID:SOV, that suggests it's on the sovereign network.
And there's plenty of those ones.
Yeah, there's like 87 different methods. So it's not great for interoperability. But what Kerry allows is if you have the identifier as a component on your mobile phone, then you can interact with any network. You're not locked into those networks. So that's a really interesting technology that we're going to be delving hard into at the Human Colossus Foundation for sure.
So the way we look at kind of the evolution, or the way I look, this is my perspective of the evolution of the self-sovereign identity stack, is we're at a point where there needs to be a lot more intelligence built into agents to really create more value. And is that kind of what your digital assistant utilizing Kerry is that all a way to say you're basically you're enabling a smarter agent that fits the real world business processes?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think it's. I mean, the advantage of it is, we're not stopping people from building on any blockchain networks, but it's at the same time we're not reliant on that as well. So, um, yeah, I mean, really, the trusted digital assistant. If I could describe it in a short sentence, I'd call it an API plugin gateway into a dynamic data economy. So whereas today on the internet you'd have a browser is really your way into the internet. The way for individual citizens to get into into the decentralized dynamic data economy is really through this component on your mobile device. Yeah, so you can think of it as a personal browser, if you like.
Yeah, which is being open sourced, and which, if I'm I don't know, if I'm the Good Health Pass or if I'm whatever ecosystem solution, I could choose to incorporate this into my stack, which gives you kind of all of the context and all of the other benefits that you need to have. If I really need to worry about privacy, I really need to worry about user experience, and this could really fuel a lot of these benefits that we talk about every day in SSI.
Absolutely. And I think that there's three kind of main domains that you really need to decentralize. And one is obviously the decentralized key management. The other is decentralized semantics. And then the last one is decentralized governance. And I think the governance piece is maybe where Kerry can really help, because you're not locked into those networks necessarily. I think that can really help to decentralize governance. In that, for instance, if I wanted to get on if I'm at border control at the UK or China or any of those, different countries, you can't expect them to all be using the same network. And I think that by kind of introducing Kerry, it kind of gets you out of those potential network lock-in issues. So that's when we say decentralized governance, I think that sits in that sort of space.
So you've chosen the trust over IP as kind of a good home to conduct certain work with the community. Do you mind describing what's going on right now within the trust over IP inside the inputs and semantics working group?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess you can think of the inputs and semantics working group as kind of the innovation hub of trust over IP, because we're not, you don't have to be an identity network that's an SSI identity network. If you're coming into the space and you have an identity solution of whatever kind, we can look at that into the inputs and semantics group and try and knit it into a kind of a proof of concept or a pilot or something like that, without disrupting some of the businesses that are already developing strong SSI solutions within the dual stack as it stands. I think there's a little bit more freedom for people to really work on brand new solutions in the inputs and semantics working group. Yeah.
Is it a lot more new solutions, or do you see a mix of? That's what we see a lot too. Is just there's so many solutions that exist in the market today. Like, I'm sure you could talk about so many things that go on in pharma, for example. And it's like where you're working on helping entrepreneurs or helping new ecosystems. But is it a mix of both that kind of come through there?
It's totally a mix of both. Absolutely. I mean, you'll get people that want to set up new ecosystems, but maybe are working with legacy, sometimes with some legacy solutions, and they want to figure out how to deconstruct what they've done to make it more decentralized. All of that sort of stuff that can come into the inputs and semantics group. And at the same time, we're also looking at kind of new solutions like semantic containers, some of the transient portability solutions. They can also fit into inputs and semantics, and we can see how we can kind of work them into moving data around in a safe and secure manner. Yeah.
It's such a cool space. And then you guys obviously have I was looking into, there's task forces on storage and portability, like you just said. There's privacy and risk, and notice and consent. It's just I I guess there's so many things that need to be thought of from the user experience standpoint, or from the business case standpoint, right? To figure out kind of what to show, what not to show, how certain functions should work, and you're able to kind of absorb that and build it into the models.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's probably one area that needs strengthening up a little bit, I think, is the user experience side of things. There is a human experience working group that is set up at Trust over IP. It's not housed in the inputs and semantics group, but it's a very new group. So I don't think they're totally up and running yet. But yeah, that'll be interesting to see what comes out of that task force.
You were talking about how user experience is such a big consideration inside kind of decentralized identity and these things. And so just a simple example of displaying a date properly, which, by the way, being in Canada, it happens, right? You write it in one format if it's in English, and another format if it's in French. And so when you talk about actually, and this is just a simple example, right? And there's so much more, and I'm would love to hear more about how you've thought about just general user experience overall. But it seems like the structure that you're building and bringing up is really enables a lot of contextualization to happen inside of the actual wallets and apps and whatever systems are being used by end users.
Yeah, I mean, the semantics part is really interesting. I think we've stumbled across a really nice architecture in that, whether it doesn't matter what language you want your credential to resolve in, or your predefined entries, they can all be resolving in your mother tongue. And because everything in OCA is a layer. Depending on the country that you're in, you're just swapping in a layer here and there rather than rebuilding the entire schema structure. So actually, you being a Canadian, you'll be interested in this. I've been building a COVID-19 vaccination specification for the COVID-19 Credentials Initiative group, which is it's an OCA formatted spreadsheet, if you like. And I showed it to the Canadian guys, and I had obviously, French Canadian, French English as some overlays, and they said, "Could you build some overlays for the native communities in Canada, like the Inuit and all that sort of stuff?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so." So I actually Googled Inuit because I have no idea, I've never seen the language before, and it kind of almost looks like hieroglyphics or something. And I thought, I don't think this is UTF-8, but interestingly, with overlays capture architecture, the character set encoding is actually a separate layer altogether. So for an interesting character set like they use, the Inuits use, you can just change the character set encoding overlay. And then rebuild all the human readable labels and all the predefined entries and everything in their language. And then the idea is that when you resolve that on your mobile phone it comes through as a form, then the whole form can be structured in their language. So it's really great for if you're traveling and you don't speak a language, you can enter everything in your own language, but then the guy at border control might just know Russian or something, then all you have to do is hit a little scroll down at the top from English to Russian, and the whole credential form changes into their language. So it's a really cool architecture. We're super proud of it.
Yeah, it's definitely won't lie, it was heavy the first time I started looking into it. Just there are so many layers, but I think the fact that you've been able to componentize it like that really makes it easy to swap in, swap out what you're trying to do based on your use case. And I guess another one, I don't know if it would be kind of the masking kind of layer, but if we're talking about selective disclosure or privacy and stuff like that, there's another layer in there that kind of addresses that too, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at kind of data management almost as a three-step process, from data collection, data capture, data exchange. That data capture, the second step, is really important because that's where you kind of rebuild the semantics for the data exchange, so that when it's kind of gone out the other end, if you like, it's all beautiful for machine learning, etc. And some of the overlays that you use in that second stage, the capture stage, are really things like your human readable labels, your predefined entries, your formats. Some of the overlays that you might use at the exchange side might differ. So that's what we're looking at the moment. So when you talk about a masking overlay, that's kind of some additional processing on maybe some attributes that you flagged in the schema base. And some of that masking might be more suited for the data exchange side rather than the data capture side as a kind of a secondary process. So we're kind of looking into all those nuances at the moment. I think that OCA has enough flexibility to really, go very granular on which overlays are used at what stage of the data lifecycle, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. And you mentioned earlier when we were talking about carry being interesting for governance because you're kind of not locked into a specific utility, but thinking about just governance around privacy, governance around whatever needs to go into kind of an ecosystem solution. This is where ecosystem builders would be able to integrate this architecture and to be able to create the rule set based on this, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And actually, the privacy folks is almost a totally different community themselves. When I talk about the master mouse model, which is kind of our vision of a dynamic data economy, it's what we talk about is really the data layer. But there's actually an entirely new layer that goes on top of that, which is the jurisdictional layer. So, for instance, is a company are they compliant to jurisdictional law to be able to operate within that sort of economy? When you talk about services, what are the services authenticated by a jurisdictional authority? That they're allowed to perform those services. So those sorts of legal things are almost like a different ecosystem altogether. And when I was talking about the trusted digital assistant, that's really where you would have APIs from that kind of jurisdictional layer plugging into your API, into your trusted digital assistant, so that that when you're looking for certain services, that they're already legal and they've been authorized properly. Yeah, it shouldn't obviously be up to the human being to decide whether some things are authorized or not. That's a kind of a legal component.
Yeah. So in a COVID credentials or the vaccination credentials use case, this is where, again, based on the jurisdiction you're in, you don't want to allow anyone to do anyone and breach privacy and stuff like that. It's all built into the system based on the jurisdiction. If I'm in Canada or in a specific province in Canada versus if I'm in a US state or if I'm in France or wherever, you could have this built right in.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
What other use cases do you find quite interesting of what you're seeing now? You obviously came from the media or music space, a lot of experience in pharma. You've been spending a lot of time with the COVID projects. What do you find super interesting, or where are you spending your most time right now?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of interesting things that we're looking into. So one of the projects that we built at the Human Colossus Foundation was a digital immunization passport, but we haven't pushed it that hard because it's really working on brand new technologies that are not standards yet. So I think there's almost going to be a second wave of digital immunization passports. There'll be the first wave that goes out. They might come across a few issues with governance and all that sort of stuff. We're kind of sitting in, I think, in the next generation of immunization passports. And one of the interesting things in that solution was trying to cryptographically link verifiable credentials to semantic containers. So the idea being that, really our view of a credential is a credential should allow you to do something. So, when you have a credential on your mobile phone, you can show it to border control. They can kind of see, oh, you've got a green tick mark, you're good to go. But all of the kind of the sensitive data that sits behind that, your sensitive health information, we've been storing that in what we call a semantic container. Where the holder of the data can give access to that container using a token. And there is obviously a cryptographic link between the container and the credential. And what's interesting with that is, the credential is great for saying, yes, this data has come from an authentic source. And so basically, by cryptographically tying that credential to the container, you can say anything in that container has been authenticated by me. And that has some interesting properties. So when you're talking about the music industry, I'm thinking, well, for music publishers, it could be really interesting. So, they've always had trouble with, people copying MP3s and giving it to their friends, and, the artist doesn't make any money. If you put an MP3 in a container, and you've got a verifiable credential saying, yes, this container has been authenticated by AC/DC or whoever the band is, then you can track it using these decentralized technologies really well. So that if anybody is accessing that MP3, firstly they need a token from let's say the publisher acting on behalf of the band. That would probably be a good way to do it. But there's always a provenance chain, back to where it came from. And there's an interesting technology we've been looking at called digital watermarking, which is a way that it just changes the composition a little bit of the digital asset within the container, so that if somebody leaks that for any reason without proper authorization to do it, you can actually track who leaked it. So that's super cool. It's a bit of a more of a kind of a defensive approach to data sharing. But I think with all these things, the more protection you can have, the better, really. So that's just another method that we're looking at of how to stop illegal data sharing.
Is a good analogy like a credential is kind of like a recipe item, but with a semantic container, that's the meal. Like you're able to put everything in together. You could take it from different places and just have it as its own package.
Exactly. Yeah, you can think of it exactly that. So it's like a bundle of information. So it could be, usage policy plus, a huge audio file plus a couple of attachments. That can all be put into a container, and then all the credential is really saying is, it's saying that everything in that container is authentic. You can take a cryptographic hash of the contents of the container, and also a cryptographic hash of the data capture structure that was used to capture that data. So that if either of those two items changes, the hash basically breaks, and then the credential is automatically nulled, if you like. So yeah, we think of it, when you have like a UPS package or something like that, is that the package is the container, and the thing that you've signed to get the package, that's your credential, and that's your way of authenticating that it's yours.
Super cool.
Under your control. Yeah.
So all of this work and thinking and pilots and stuff, you're bringing all this to the trust over IP. You seem to be working with sovereign. Is it more specifically on the UX or guardianship side of things? And then you're also involved with Cantera.
Yeah. So yeah, in all of those communities in varying capacities. So I work with the My Data community, are very much about personal data. So I set up the My Data Health thematic group over there. So it's really about making sure that health data is treated properly throughout the data lifecycle. That's one thing I do. The COVID-19 Credentials Initiative, CCI, I run the schema task force there. So we're basically creating schema specifications for COVID-19 tests, test reports, test certificates, vaccine reports, vaccine certificates, those sorts of things. At Sovereign, I lead the communications team. Yeah, so that's, I don't know how I got lumped into that, but I still do that. So whenever you see blog posts going out from Sovereign, it's usually pulled into our group and we vet it and make sure that it's kind of accurate and supportive of the community. Yeah, and then Kantara. So Kantara, I work very closely with the notice and consent group over there. Notice and consent is totally not my expertise, but I know how important that piece is to the whole ecosystem. So I'm trying my best to learn as much as I can. And there's some amazing people in that space who have as much knowledge in their space as I do in semantics. So, I'm totally in awe of those guys as well. So,
yeah, the different communities advocating for just trusted data or self-sovereign identity or decentralized identity, however you call it. I think everyone has the same kind of ethos of what we're trying to do, and it's just the community is amazing. Like everyone just is trying to help each other out. Everyone's trying to give. It's honestly we're quite fortunate to work with these types of people every day. It's amazing. It's very motivating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're dealing with people that have 25 years of identity experience and 25 years of consent, and getting these people to the same table and agreeing on what a dynamic data economy should look like, and yeah, just totally blown away by the level of knowledge.
So I guess to close, where could you use help? How could people help you just to keep pushing the dynamic data economy forward and all these things forward?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's very much a cross-community effort, really. I mean, the Human Colossus Foundation is pretty much as agnostic as you like. We don't really have an agenda. We talk to all the communities, and we really try and make sure that everybody has a space at the dinner table to put their objectives forward. So for the good of the economy. Yeah, so moving forward, if anybody's really interested in this space, I would suggest that Trust over IP, the Inputs and Semantics Working Group, is a great place to join. You'll get a really very, very broad perspective on the economy from a lot of specialists all working together. So for a quick fix on a lot of information, that's a great place to go. At Trust over IP, on kind of looking at the dual stack, there's also space for governance, obviously across the governance stack, and also new technologies in the technology stack. So there's, I think Trust over IP is a great space to join. I think when it was first set up, there was always there were a few murmurings that this is just Sovereign rebranded, but it's actually much broader than that. Sovereign is a utility for self-sovereign identity, and will always probably be seen as the genesis point of that whole ecosystem. But Trust over IP really goes much broader than that. It's self-sovereign identity, but it's also decentralized consent, semantics, ecosystems. It's a much broader space. And the reason I say that is because for anybody that is uneasy about SSI or have any doubts about it, that just go into Trust over IP and there will be a space for your expertise for sure. Yeah.
Agreed. Well, thank you, Paul, very much for doing this with me. It was a great conversation, and I'm sure people are going to find this quite interesting and want to go a little deeper into the stack that you guys are bringing forward. I know this is an area that I'm quite interested in going a lot deeper in. So thank you for doing this.
No, pleasure. Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. To stay up to speed with future episode releases, please subscribe to the podcast on whatever channel you're listening to it right now. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me directly. You can find me online. I'm quite active on LinkedIn and Twitter, so I look forward to hearing from you. See you all next time.